Stall avoidance software on the Boeing 737 MAX. I've chosen this as an issue in aviation that appears to have been caused by a failure of operations management. The implementation of MCAS, which stands for Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, was a decision that has brought about a lot of criticism against Boeing. Here's the agenda for this presentation. I'll provide some background into the plane crashes that sparked discussions concerning MCAS. We'll go over failures in design, quality processes, certifications, and we'll wrap this up with final remarks. Here's some background into how MCAS came to be. But long story short, this all boils down to competition and the chain of events that followed in Boeing's quest to obtain a competitive advantage against Airbus. Airbus is Boeing's top competitor, and when Airbus introduced the A320neo, Boeing responded by modernizing the 737 next generation fleet into the 737 MAX. The biggest upgrade was the replacement of aircraft engines to the LEAP 1B engine. CFM International developed these engines, and they boasted a 15% reduction in fuel consumption and carbon dioxide emissions, a 50% reduction in nitrogen oxides, and noise levels were compliant with FAA standards. However, due to the increased size and dimensions of the LEAP 1B engine, the primary concern became the distance between the bottom edge of the engine and the ground. The 737 next generation engines were already close to the ground, so lessening the gap was not ideal. Engineers got together and decided to mount the engines higher and more forward of the wings. This created new issues, as moving the engines up and forward on the 737 airframe caused an extra lift generated at high angles of attack and low speed, especially during takeoffs. This also made pilots more prone to inadvertently pulling the yoke or the control column further aft, which brings the aircraft closer to stalling conditions. In comes MCAS software to save the day, as it was installed to assist aircraft handling along the longitudinal axis during unusual flight conditions. And Boeing characterizes such unusual flight conditions as the rare instances in which the nose of the airplane is unusually high. So when you think of MCAS, just think of a software program designed to bring the nose of the aircraft up or down when the program thinks the aircraft is at an unsafe angle. The following conditions must be met for MCAS to engage. Flaps need to be fully up, the pilot's flying the aircraft manually and not in autopilot, and the angle of attack sensor, or the AOA sensor, relays that the aircraft is flying at an angle that exceeds the program thresholds. The AOA sensor relays information to the Flight Control Computer, or the FCC, and the FCC activates MCAS. Now, the issue with this design is initially the 737 MAX only had one AOA sensor, and this component has a history of being degraded, as was the case with Lion Air Flight 610 in 2018 and Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 in 2019. With both flights, pilots experienced complications with controlling the aircraft during flight as the MCAS system was engaged and attempting to counter-steer against a high angle of attack flight condition that did not exist. This was due to erroneous data being relayed from the AOA sensor. Specifically, MCAS forced the nose of the aircraft down 26 times in 10 minutes during the Lion Air flight. This attributed to the crash in the Java Sea 13 minutes after takeoff, in which no one survived. Effective quality management processes determine the customer's quality expectations and establishes policies and procedures to try to achieve that quality. Boeing dropped the ball, as MCAS software was not disclosed to pilots until after the first crash in 2018. I imagine it'd be pretty difficult to cater to a customer's quality expectations if they don't even know they're using your product. In response to the 2018 crash, Boeing published a Flight Crew Operations Manual Bulletin. Within this document was a checklist that the pilots in the Ethiopian Airlines flight in 2019 followed during the in-flight emergency. Even with a checklist specifically written to respond to MCAS, it was not sufficient enough to save the flight in 2019. Although there's a lack of information regarding Boeing receiving feedback on MCAS, Boeing does possess analytical data on the performance capabilities of MCAS, as it's been in use on the KC-46 Pegasus prior to being installed on the 737 MAX. There has not been any major incidents or crashes of the KC-46 concerning MCAS. However, the lack of quality reported by customers further adds discredit to Boeing's ability to determine customers' quality expectations. The United States Air Force stopped accepting the KC-46 Pegasus due to an unacceptable amount of discrepancies, such as unreliable auxiliary power units, excessive fuel leaks, foreign objects and debris in closed compartments. It's clear Boeing needs to do more in establishing effective policies and procedures concerning quality management. In the later stages of the development process is certification. Certification involves an analysis of the product and processes. Standards for aviation software can be found in publications such as the DO 178C, and within this publication is guidance on the use of reverse engineering and many other in-depth means of validating airworthiness. Upon the completion of meticulous analysis, testing, and assessments, a classification is given. From the highest to the lowest impact to aircraft functionality, the ratings are catastrophic, hazardous, major, minor, or no effect. MCAS received a hazardous rating, bringing attention to the ambiguities in the certification process that leave room for subjectivity when assigning ratings. One argument is MCAS should receive the highest rating due to it being a safety critical function. Another argument is that the hazardous rating given to MCAS is too high, and that a rating of major or below would be more appropriate. More considerations are taken for components with a higher rating, and this begs the question of whether the likelihood of considering redundancy within the MCAS system would have been initiated had the catastrophic rating been obtained. Final remarks. Boeing developed a system that relies on input from a single component that has a history of degradation. Incorporating redundancy in a critical safety system was clearly overlooked and is an obvious flaw in the design that operations managers should have caught. Boeing was negligent in informing pilots of MCAS. Additionally, there was a lack of time spent on research and development that could have very well been attributed to the misclassification of MCAS by DO 178C standards. These failures by Boeing ultimately led to the grounding of the 737 MAX fleet across the globe after the 2019 crash. Today, the 737 MAX is back in the air, and MCAS now requires input from 2 AOA sensors that must agree prior to it activating. Also, the system will only be activated once and no longer overrides the pilot's ability to control the aircraft.